being here today. Now you know that I'm Gloria Aquino Sosa, and that I'm the college's Senior Diversity Officer, and I'm also Associate Professor and Chair of the Counseling Department. I also serve as Faculty Co-Director of the High Potential Program for First Gen and or low-income students. I've been here at the college since 2011, and I am honored to have this opportunity with you all as we celebrate 20 years of victories. I am in awe of so many women who are here, but Yvette and I would both like to share our gratitude for Sharon Sabota and her teams past, present, and future, who never waver in their commitment to the movement and to equity as a way forward for all of us. Your work is unstoppable, because you made it so. We must always use our voices to lift as we climb and to never ever forget the work of those who came before us. Like Mrs. Betty Reed Soskin, who literally laid the foundation for this work. I see the outstanding women of WAGS, Women in Gender Studies, and the fine work and activism that has permeated their time at St. Mary's and beyond. And I see my colleague, Dr. Yvette Castillo-Clark, who shares a passion for truth and justice, as well as this podium with me.
Thank you, Gloria. Can you all hear me? Maybe? There we go. And my name is Yvette Castillo-Clark. I've been here at St. Mary's College since the fall of 2013 as the Dean of Students, overseeing a number of offices, the offices of housing, residential experience, community life, student involvement and leadership, and the Office of Meetings, Events, and Conference Services, and new student and family programs. In addition to what Priyanka said, I am a Title IX deputy of the college, chair our behavioral intervention team, and I am a triple chair of a committee called the Committee on the Integration of the Undergraduate Experience, with wonderful, great women colleagues, Drs. Tracy Hascody and Dr. Angelica Moore. And together, Gloria and I are the co-chairs of the college's Bias Incident Response Team, simply known as BIRT. And we are honored to be invited to welcome you to celebrating 20 years of victories on this International Women's Day. So I woke up this morning thinking about my maternal grandmother. For some strange reason, she popped into my head. This is not all the time, as she has passed away 19 years ago. My glimpse of her this morning was an old passport photo during the 1940s, getting ready for their journey on what we believe is the USS General M.N. Patrick, a transport ship during World War II. She was headed across the Pacific Ocean from the Philippines with children in tow to meet my grandfather, a soldier of World War II, based at Camp Stoneman, just east of here in Pittsburgh, California. So my grandmother is posed in the middle, and she's flanked by her 4 children. No one is smiling, but it's a combination look of fright, loss, wonder, curiosity. I can never describe it in one word. And then I received a text message this morning from our godmother in New Orleans. Her name is T. Lena, is what we call T. Lena. She represents for us strength, humor, independence. She speaks her mind with eloquence and wisdom. She's a retired counselor from the Metropolitan Battered Women's Shelter of New Orleans. And it was an emoji text that she sent me this morning saying, "Happy International Women's Day." So I share this because a simple passport photo and a simple emoji text today gave me 2 images of some of the strongest women in my life. These 2 small things today mattered. And that's why the theme of today's conference, Small Things Matter, is so personal for me. All the small things, collectively, have created a significant pathway, an opportunity, or an experience that have shaped the way that I encounter the world, how I lead in the world in service to others.
So I came to St. Mary's in 1989 and got to participate in the founding of the Women's Studies program in 1993. I first got up and rolling in 1994 and 95. I joined the program as the coordinator with Sandy Grayson, the director of the program, in 1996. And while we were developing curriculum for the Women's Studies program and trying to put out our own fires, we started to get more and more students coming to our offices saying, there are all these sexual assaults happening on campus. We need you to get involved. And we would say, this is an academic program. We have no involvement in those areas. But students felt that they weren't being heard by the administrators who were in charge of these issues at the time. So we started to work with some of them. We had a new president of the college, and we started to try to get a hearing with him to address these issues. And neither Sandy nor myself could get in his door. The students were getting more and more upset about these things, and some of these issues were being brought to the Student Senate, and they felt that they wanted to have their voices heard and make a statement. So two students in particular, Erin Wetzel and Rachel Eagle, started to organize other students, among them Ashley Music and Megan Kroll, all of whom were women's studies students, to organize a series of town hall meetings and speak outs and then a march. The march was held specifically to request attention on matters of sexual assault on campus, and to also get a hearing for establishing a women's center on campus. Because as we were making clear in women's studies, this is not the purview of the academic side of the college. This belongs in student involvement and leadership, or at the time it was called student affairs. And so the students wanted to establish a women's center in student affairs. And interestingly enough, there were enough people who had complaints against that new administration with the new president, whose name doesn't matter, but his brother Craig, to get the support of the Student Senate and also the Collegian, which at that time had a feminist editor, Renee Sando, and a feminist news editor, Amanda Chavez, both of whom were convinced that sexual assaults on campus were being underreported, that the Clery Act wasn't being followed, and that Title IX wasn't being held in any kind of legal support system within the college administration. So as I say, they got together, women's studies students, the Student Senate, and the Collegian all got together to hold this march. And it was March 9th, 1998. We were very excited. The faculty were very excited. We kept saying, is it 1972? This is so cool. It felt like the 60s in Berkeley. Wow. Over 300 people turned out for this march. They all had signs. The newly installed statue of De La Salle was the great gathering place for all the marchers. And they set up a microphone and had us speak out. And the students all said, we demand a women's resource center. Very shortly after that, we got a hearing with Brother Craig. Faculty did, Sandy and myself, and he gave us the charge of coming up with a proposal for a Women's Resource Center. So we teamed up with Sherry Richards, who was the director of counseling at the time, and we researched other women's centers at other colleges and universities, and we came up with a budget, and we wrote the proposal for the Women's Resource Center. And it was approved, we got a search committee together, and at that point, we hired Rosie. And she had a lot of interesting experiences in those first years. As she pointed out, it was 1999. But there was so much support from not only students, but faculty and staff who had become very, very concerned about the issues at hand, both with the articles in the Collegian and the march and the town hall meetings by other students. And it was a very exciting time. It was a very galvanizing, exciting time. So I'm going to pass over the mic to Roseanne and let her tell you about 1999 and beyond.
I have in front of me a lot of archival documents that I put together, and one was listed by an alum, Heidi Bryant, November 12th, 1998, and it says Women's Resource Center Goals. And I can't emphasize more that all the work of the 20 years has been because of students and student activism. Women students, male students, female identified students, gender diverse students. And whenever I would come to an impasse and go to Denise would say, go back to the students. And that has been the key to these 20 years, and I just want to really emphasize that. And so from the get-go, 1998, Women's Center resources, goals, outreach, services, support, participation, inclusivity. I mean, that's pretty sophisticated for 1998. And I was here as a faculty member, and I saw a little posting of a little tan-colored call for the coordinator at the time, part-time, and I looked at that, I was standing over there, and I thought, I could do this. But little did I know what was going to occur over the next years. One of the first things I did when I was hired, and I was hired in a purple suit that I was going to wear today, but then I decided not to do that. And the first thing we did was we created something called the Women's Advocates, because one of the first things I did was outreach myself, and I looked towards my colleagues at UC Davis, where I was a graduate, and where my first mentoring experience was taking a women's history class from the historian Ruth Rosen. And I lived in this student apartment across from campus, and one evening there was a giant, what I thought was a parade outside my window, and I looked out, and it was a Take Back the Night March, and I was just really overwhelmed by that, and then I started myself volunteering at their fledgling center those years ago. It was 1980. And so I returned to those folks, and they really mentored me, and then they hooked me up with the consortium of women's centers. And at the time, there were 300 centers across the country, but not very many faith-based centers. And the most prominent faith-based centers at the time was Georgetown University. And that director, Nancy Cantalupo, who is still there, really took me under her wing. And she said, no matter what scrutiny you're going to get at St. Mary's, it can't compare to what we're getting at Georgetown. And they had folks like spying on them and impersonating students with needs. And so that was really enormous. The level of national mentoring that I received was very, very, very profound. And we started in a little office. I blocked this out of my mind. In back of Roncalli, where people were eating lunch, and it was a temporary wall, so there was no confidentiality. And I was looking over my notes, and one note said, send Brother Jack's old desk to Roseanne. I saw that last night, and I thought, wow, how far we have come with your leadership. Seriously, because space was a big issue at the time. And so the next move was suggested to take over the women's back room, which was outside of what was then the health center. So I remember standing outside with our core students looking at the women's back room, and they were very seriously saying, well, we're going to convert this for you, the women's back room. And so at every turn, we had to say, no, we don't think that's the best idea. And so then we had a space outside of the health center, which also had its challenges. I think I got bronchitis like 6 times in the first year, because I had to walk through the health center. But through it all, and at every turn, we had students, and we had something called the Women's Studies Board, which I was invited to join. And that became crucial institutionally, because it wasn't just me or the students. We had an institutional structure where we could go. And then the first thing we did was we created something called the Women's Advocates, and we trained in the first few months 31 student volunteers. And we partnered with a lot of outside agencies, including Stand for Domestic Violence. And we had an amazing trainer, Alana Jurjoy, who is now at Amherst, and she trained all of us in sexual assault awareness and services, and other things as well. And over time, I guess what I could say about it is sexual assault, campus sexual assault by default became a primary emphasis for us because so many of the assaults that were happening were not just underreported, but unfortunately covered up, evidence destroyed. And we had a brave group of survivors who would, over time, start coming to the forefront. And at the same time, we had amazing community support. Our very first event was bringing June Jordan from Poetry of the People from Oakland. And she came, I remember very well, and she met with students after, and she said to students, you know, if you're upset about things, there are activist traditions that you can engage in, including boycotting, going on strike, and that will come later in the narrative. Our next guest that we brought was Angela Davis, because she had come with her friend June Jordan and said, what is this place, St. Mary's?
That was her second.
Second, because you had brought her. Denise had brought her and then brought her again. And so we also started bringing a lot of women and a lot of women of color, a lot of queer women to campus. Our next guest was Alba Villanueva, who came. And the reason we did that, of course, was because in those days we weren't yet using the word intersectionality for Kimberly Crenshaw, but we certainly were trying to practice it. And so the very first practice, could you write it? We set up all these student groups, and I'm just going to read you what they were. The new advocates, the other group was Understanding and Loving Our Bodies, a body image discussion group, a Women of Color Alliance, a lesbian and bisexual support group, and what was pretty rare at that time, a graduate students network. And we started this within the first month. And again, I want you to listen to how relevant it is 20 years later, those categories, which I don't think we would change that much. I'm sure we would add. And we also were conscious of bringing in marginalized men, because I had a long experience of working with marginalized men, both men of color and gender diverse and queer men. And that also was a constant presence, I think, throughout the center's life. We also had a major donation from our alum Megan Kroll's mother, who in the second year gave us a grant of $10,000, which at that time was an enormous gift to us, because we were having a hard time in terms of institutional funding. And then over time, we got more grants. We got a series of grants where we had $30,000 over time. And that enabled us to both bring speakers and start these programs. And then, as survivors became more and more public, things ratcheted up, I guess I would say. And at the top levels of the institution, there was profound hostility, I will just say, at that time. And I remember often being called to the presidential residence to explain myself. And sometimes I would just bring students unannounced. And one time I went by myself, and the president of the college told me that my problem was but I didn't know how to play in the sandbox with others. And I still don't quite understand what that metaphor was about, but I think what it was about was our students unequivocally not allowing no to be told to them with these very, very crucial issues where women were getting sexually assaulted. There was a lot of relationship violence, and I would always say to the college, this is not anything unusual. This is what's happening nationally. And the more that we can voice that and you honor what students are saying, the more positive change we can make. Because St. Mary's was no different than other colleges at the time. The difference became the way the students enacted their voice, and it went to a national stage when students had a hunger strike in May of 2001. And at that time, there was no social media, there was no texting, there was no Instagramming, but I remember the phone call that said to me, the CNN truck is coming. That is how important this event was nationally. It was a very, very rare occurrence. There was no film The Hunting Ground. There was no Lady Gaga singing. This is very important to remember that St. Mary's was the seat, one of the seats of true campus sexual assault change. And it had reverberations across the country and certainly in the Bay Area. No other Bay Area campus was doing this, but yours or ours. And then, because the media was coming on campus, the students were outside under the statue with tents, with Gatorade, with demands, and the series of demands were really responding to what you both had to say, and that was safety on campus. There were no blue light phones. There were no posting of the Clery Act. There were no crime boards. There were no consequences. Even when students were found responsible for sexual assault, we had one student found responsible, and the consequence was to write an essay about sexual assault. There was one student who was very close to getting expelled, but that got reversed. So here are some of the demands of our student strikers who called themselves a community of students hungry for justice. Isn't that brilliant? Amendments to the student handbook, notification to students of campus sexual assault, first-year orientation, improvements in campus physical safety, proper training of every residential advisor and every resident director, St. Mary's complete compliance with the Clery Act, the position of sexual assault response coordinator to become permanent, amnesty for reporting. At that time, students were really discouraged to report because there was a no fraternization policy. And of course, where you have campus dormitories, that's where most campus assaults occurred. And we also had a cohabitation rule. And cohabitation was if you just visited.
They're past.
Yes. And there was also a call for the removal of, at that time, the Vice President of Student Affairs. And students were there all day and all night. And then at 2 o'clock in the morning, we all assembled together, students with the demands with the president, and there was reached a positive outcome. And I have to say, over time, all those student demands were met over time. And with your guidance, sort of more or less.
The alums had to come back.
They did.
And, yeah.
And we can fill in more details. But the other thing that occurred was I got a mysterious email that said, we've been contacted here at KGO News, and we'd like to talk to you. And everyone thinks mistakenly that I was the initiator of the news stories that began in 2002. And I wasn't, and I don't know who was, and I'll never know. But I think over the strife that caused, it led to further important change. And there was a series of stories by Dan Noyes, who's still there, the investigative reporter for KGO News, and I still have that footage. And what it did was it brought a public face to survivors. That is what it did. Yes, I was there, but I was just there as sort of a figurehead person. But it was those women who gave a face and a name to campus sexual assault. And I'm telling you, this was revolutionary in 2002 and really unforgettable. And then we had a student whose case actually made it to the court system. And as you know, what is the statistic? 2% make it. And that student pled no contest to the very brutal sexual assault of one of our alums. And what that brought to us again was the struggle to get these through the court system and the reaffirmation that justice should happen on a campus, and that we should strive to figure out how to do that and how to do that well and how to do that better. And so that is my summary of 1999 to 2002. And my hair did turn all gray by the end of 2002, and since then I've had to color all my hair.
I remember I'd come straight really from India, and I was being interviewed in what's now it's a small, tiny portion of class, like the receptionist area of class. That's what used to be the center. And I was sitting on a green rocking chair and doing my best to hide my sparkly flip-flops underneath my long dress because I'd really just come straight from India. And yeah, so it's really interesting to hear all the different iterations that have happened over time. So I come in that year, 2002, and the climate, the word interesting is always a loaded word, but it was very interesting. And in some ways, the position felt a little bit like window dressing. I remember meeting the president at the time, and he was very kind to me, and he said, "Thank you, I'm so glad you could spend the year with us. You know, what will you be doing next year?" Making sure that I remembered that I would have a very short stay here. And I remember when students had another event around 2003, which Crystal will be talking to you about a little bit later. There's a lot of organizing of some of the events that Roseanne has been speaking about. As those went into another iteration and more media attention came, we had another round of students walking off campus. I remember at the time, I was talking about this with Crystal earlier, the administration was not pro-media. And I was saying, as a journalist, I think this is an opportunity because you can weigh in on your narrative if you'll speak to the media. If you don't, people will fill in the gaps. And if you take ownership, that's really the only route to go here. I couldn't see an alternative. But that wasn't resolved necessarily. So I remember Crystal and many other students walking off campus to meet the media who were waiting across the street. I forget how many different outlets were here, but for sure Dan Noyes was there. Was it just ABC or others?
No,
There's a few others. Yeah. At some point, she also had a wrestling match with an administrator who wanted to take her camera away, which I can tell you about because it was in the news. So we had these moments along the way. And I remember on the actual day that students they'd been out all night, and the director at the time was Laura Armstrong. she was a single mother, and I remember she decided she would be the one to be here, and I was in Concord with her children, and getting the news at like 2 or 3 in the morning that the position had been made permanent. And I remember having really mixed emotions about that and thinking, oh, like, what am I gonna, like, I hadn't had a lot of agency in my position. I knew the work was important, but I hadn't experienced maybe the buy-in. And so I remember coming to campus the next day and saying like, oh, that's great. And I really did mean it, that it was great. But I wasn't sure how long I had it in me to continue in this space. I wanted to be able to make real change, or at least contribute to the seeds of change. As you do this work for a while, you learn that change is a very slow process. Hence our title, Small Things Matter, Small Steps Matter. But that's what happened. And then the director at the time, Laura Armstrong, she decided about a year in, she said, you know, I think I'm out. I'm heading back to Iowa. So she did that. And then I held both roles for a number of years. But starting in 2003, that's when we came up. We had a task force. We came up with the, what's now called the Care Line. At the time, it was called something, it's had a few names along the way. But basically, it was the sexual assault response team hotline, where you would call. And if, at the time, if you made your call through that line, then somebody could assist you in getting all the resources that you needed, meeting you at the hospital, whatever the case might have been. Now we've moved to a model where the care line is a confidential line, and Erin will be able to speak more to that. And also, the sexual assault prevention role is a confidential role, which is something that we've been advocating for a long time. So the seeds are planted. Many years later, they come to fruition. Because there's so many years to cover, and there's also questions that Priyanka has, I'm going to skip ahead shortly to just kind of give you, I'm just going to highlight a couple of really key moments. So in addition to the position being made permanent, I remember Brother Craig walking into the center in 2003, the day after everybody had pulled an all-nighter. We heard that Brother Jack was going to be leaving the college, which he said was just a coincidence. He had just happened to decide that night as the students were. He said he was going to go anyways, but anyway, he made his decision that night. So that happened, and then Brother Craig said, you know what could I do to really show support? And then Laura and I said, well, you could actually take out an ad in the Collegian to endorse the vagina monologues. And he did it. He did this in 2003. So we did a production of the vagina monologues with the backing of the president. I'll talk about that for just a quick minute because it was a really interesting time, and I'm not sure that the community here was ready for it or beyond. There are national people that do nothing except for watch to see who's doing this, and then they call. So the number of calls I got from people who were saying like, do you know what Jesus would say about you doing this production? And I said, well, I don't actually. And then they would say, well, do you know what a Catholic person might say? And I said, well, I was raised Catholic. You're Catholic too. I guess we have different perceptions. And then, you know, the basics, Catholics still do have vaginas. Catholics still do experience sexual assault. And they're also not immune from dating and domestic violence. So thank you so much for your perspective. And, you know, we would field a lot of these calls. And I would work with media relations because they would also field calls. So I began crafting responses to help people understand kind of the intention of the program and giving people language, right? The intention of the program, since I've got the microphone at this moment, is really, the intention of it is that when young children or anybody is sexually abused, if they don't have language to call their body parts what they are, they remain silent, right? And so it's about putting some voice, calling a thing what it is, and equipping people with language, taking the stigma out of it. So that was what was at the core of it. And then people would go into specific monologues and say, well, if you take this one out and you do this, anyways, it will always be a hot button topic. So that was always an interesting time. Later in the day, you'll hear a video where an alum recalls a poster campaign that was put up about our production of the vagina monologues, which I'd forgotten about, where I think the poster said, the vagina is the orifice that won't shut up, or something very derogatory. And we had all kinds of things going on. I also used to have a man, and I feel like I still see him in the community, who would sometimes walk onto campus and into the center with a newspaper and show it to me and say, you know, this is what it is saying about abortion, like you should not be doing these. And I was like, we're not doing that. And so there's just these really outlandish narratives that people had that connected to this type of work. And if you were doing something about gender equity or ending gender-based violence, then that must mean you're promoting all of these other things. So we began crafting language for all of these things. So, for example, regardless where you stand, what your perspective is on anti-choice versus pro-choice, we will serve you. And by the way, that is a fraction of the issues that ever come into the center. But really having to put that narrative out there, because I realized if we weren't saying it explicitly, then people would fill in the gaps and they would make it up with what serves them. I'm using Vagina Monologues as an example of a program that's really made some waves here, because it is something that students, as we surveyed, like what was your most impactful moment, what was life-changing for you, they keep coming back to that production.
In 2003, some students, male students, organized a counter-protest to our protest, which is very funny to me and ironic because we were never protesting, we were demanding. And they allowed for everyone to sign up for time slots, and of course this is in front of the De La Salle statute, right, where all things happen. And I was the last person on the list, and so when they got up, and it was my turn, and I knew it was my turn, and people were standing in front of me, and I'm very quick on my feet, and I got around them, and then grabbed the microphone, and they shut it off. That's okay, I can talk with loud. And turning off a microphone isn't going to stop my voice, and it's going to stop the voice of the people behind me and with me. And so that moment of not having a microphone, and them thinking that would just thereby stop me from talking, please, please, that's not going to work. We have to keep talking. We have to keep these moments going.
Going back to Penelope's question, I think for me, and thank you for keeping the question first, because I didn't really think about it. I really had to think about, and going back to the work when I started when I was 23 years old, I think it would be, if I knew then the impact that I could have on people. I had no idea. I was growing up myself, so I really didn't have any idea of the impact that I could have on people. And I think realizing that so much further in my career, because then I think I really saw it as the person in front of me. Like I'm advocating for that person, which is really important, of course, but I didn't think about it on the level that I could with other, like a larger level, a systemic level. Whether that be, in the space that I was at the agency with law enforcement, or whatever it was, I just had no idea what kind of an impact I could have. And I think if I knew that then, I could have even done more work back then. I think, thankfully, I figured it out about, I don't know, by the time I was about 30, 35, I was like, oh, I guess I am impacting people. And I knew it with my clients. I knew the one-on-one, the direct service work I was doing, because I would, have them tell me. But I didn't know above that, like in a broader sense, what that looked like. So yeah, I think that if I knew that, I would maybe have done more. But now that I know that I continue to do that as I move forward in the work.
The president at one point felt bad, somewhat, about, all the bad blood between, women's studies and our students, and then when Roseanne was the coordinator of the center. So as the center found its footing on campus, and, Roseanne had to start from go and buy furniture and a desk and all the things she had to do, he wanted to help. And so he gave her some art. And this art has disappeared for years because the center has moved so many times. And last week, Renee Egan, who's the administrative assistant for Women's and Gender Studies, and I found it in a closet in Dante, in some kind of steamer room. What noticed that, Lori, that steamer room there. So it's a little moldy. But I would like to represent it to Roseanne and Sharon to see the amazing and weird art that Brother Craig gave to the center. And I forget what his card said, but it was something like, "This is the ideal woman." No.
Me now can tell me in 2003 here is you can do this. You've got it. Just keep going. It's only hard because you're developing the skill sets to do it well. And if you just keep going, it'll get easier for you and everyone else. And I think that's a hard thing to tell a young woman of color is that it'll get easier, and it's only hard now because you don't know what you're doing. But once you figure it out, it's going to become automatic. And advocating for yourself and advocating for others is what you're going to do best. But I think sometimes we forget that St. Mary's is an institution of education, it's an institution of learning. And all of your learning doesn't begin in the classroom. It's in those moments in someone's office. It's a conversation over maybe a fourth cup of coffee. And that's where you learn the skill sets that will help improve your life and others.